you're talking about the difference between currency and money. You said that money will actually hold value or purchasing power across time, whereas currency will not. Can we just put a little more color on that? Like why is that? And how did we get into this money versus currency dichotomy? And then where does Bitcoin fit? Is Bitcoin money or is Bitcoin currency or is it both? How do you see that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question because you can literally go back to the 1800s and you could start there. But I don't want to start there. Let's go back to like when gold was the foundation of the system, because I think that's where really Bitcoin's heading to, because they demonetized gold. That led to pretty much the monetization and financialization of real estate, which is why we see such a big monetary premium there. But what happened was those original paper notes were just claims against the money.
Yeah.
And that money was equity. It was value that already existed through proof of work. It wasn't promise of tomorrow's production.
Right.
And now that currency, I think it gained that exception. Like it fought that psychological war, right? Like, this is paper, I want my gold. Yeah, but when you use the paper, you can turn it in for the gold. And when you go to the grocery store, it's much easier, it's much faster, right? So you have that economic argument where, look, when you use gold, the monetary velocity is limited. Kind of like Bitcoin is right now. Like monetary velocity is limited. And that's not necessarily a bad thing when it's underpinning the system, when it's the base layer money.
Right.
Because now you have these paper units and you could very easily track. Look, when everything started to fall apart and other countries like France and even other Euro bankers started to speculative attack the dollar, they would just create credit out of thin air, borrow $1 billion, and then take those dollars and redeem them for gold. So you have like credit expansion then being claimed against a limited monetary asset. And it's like, you can't let this happen because now you're attacking the system. So when they removed gold from the system in 71, and I love the WTF happened in 1971 because you have all the charts where you can see the tipping point. But that's when currency, and you astutely pointed this out earlier, that's when it became a debt derivative.
Right.
It was a derivative of money. And it was just a tool. It was an L2 to increase the velocity of the money. And it worked beautifully. However, when they detached the money and then put in this debt and the currency became a derivative of debt, it could no longer hold value.
It's no longer money.
Because, it can't be money because it's not a derivative of the money. It's now a derivative of not proof of work, but of proof of promise. I promise I'll be able to do this in the future. I promise I'll create this value in the future.
And herein lie the pyramid scheme mechanics, right? It's just layers of promises.
It's layers and layers of promises, and then those promises get rehypothecated. And this is how you get into a scenario where we are today, where you run a budget deficit. Imagine if we were still on gold, the government would only be able to spend what it collects in taxes. And that would be it, because as the debt grew, it would not be sustainable against that hard money, because it would be very obvious that, how many years is it going to take us to, debt to GDP is 123%. Japan's debt to GDP is over 250%. So you start to say, wait a second, if our economy keeps growing and does really well, it becomes a reality check. Like, we can't, even if our sons and their sons do this, we need to figure this out. But when you eliminate that reality check, that creates where we are today, where things have become, and that's the beautiful Mises quote, where it's like, look, you either stop it, and our leaders chose the opposite. They didn't choose to let gold stay there and let the system crash. They chose to detach the gold and quadruple down on the expansion of the currency units.
Dude, this is where it's so fascinating to me too, because, and this is not, I don't think this is an analogy or a metaphor. I'm going to say it like it's an analogy, but I think it's fundamentally what it is. It's like when you tell a lie and someone catches you in the lie, you need to tell another lie to cover that up, right? And then someone catches you in the lie, you need to tell another lie, and you're just building this house of cards. And that is the lie, right? Once the currency is no longer redeemable for money, gold, it's now a lie. It is a promise that will never be fulfilled. It was a promise to money. Now it's a promise that you're never going to get money. It's just a promise to promises ad infinitum. And that deviation, every time you print money, it's like telling another lie, right? And you create a fork in reality, right? There's objective reality that goes on doing what it does in thermodynamic, the universe basically. And then there's this like intersubjective social reality that we fork off with the printing of money. And it is very much, if not identical to that situation where someone tells a lie and needs to tell another lie and another lie. And eventually, as we all know the ending to the story, eventually it collapses, right? And you get the reconciliation to reality.
Yeah.
The lies collapse and you come back to the truth. And that's where you can start building on a firm foundation again.
Yes.
But there's no way to continue doing that. You can't do it forever because guess what? Reality doesn't care. Ayn Rand has this amazing quote. You are free to ignore reality, but you are not free to ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. And this is literally the trap we are in.
Yeah.
And we're all screaming it from the mountaintops, and I just don't know what else we can say to wake more people up. And this is where I come to the bitter realization often. It's like, it's just going to take the pain and the time.
Yeah.
People are just going to have to go through the pain and the time and the experience to understand that they've been getting their face ripped off in this scam.
I don't think regular people are actually going to figure it out. But I do think financiers, lenders, market makers, they're starting to figure it out.
Yeah.
And the reason that they're figuring it out is because of the difference between commodity credit and circulating credit. So circulating credit is credit that's not backed by anything. It's fractional reserve banking practice. And that's what we see today. You can just create debt on a balance sheet and then spend those units into the economy. And unfortunately for the United States, we spend those units into the economy. It creates a negative ROI. So for every dollar, right now, for every dollar we borrow, we owe $1.04 or like $1.04.50. But we're probably creating like 70 cents, maybe worse. Like I might be a little too optimistic.
When you're this far into
we're not
the
even getting back
indebtedness.
principal. So if you're not getting back principal, how are you going to pay back principal? You need if you borrow $1 and you owe $1.04, you need to create more than $1.04
for it to work
in order for debt to GDP to be reduced.
Right.
But we keep borrowing the dollars, spending it into the economy, getting a negative return on investment, and we know that for a fact because our debt to GDP continues to become less and less strong and becomes more unhealthy.
Hence the
but that's
debt spiral.
Circulating credit.
Yeah.
When you go back to commodity credit, and that's what Bitcoin does. That's what I believe the future of finance is going to be built around Bitcoin equity as the most pristine form of collateral in the world. Because debt promises are not a form of pristine collateral. A proof of work asset with absolute digital scarcity that can be settled across time and space in 10 minutes with absolute certainty and security, that is pristine collateral.
Yeah.
And the Bitcoin credit market, commodity credit market that is being built and emerging right now, that is what's really waking up the top players in the world. The top capital allocators in the world are now starting to understand, wait a second, the risk-free borrower in the marketplace isn't the person with the printer. The risk-free rate isn't the person what the printer is willing to pay. The risk-free borrower is the person who's posting pristine collateral. Because if something goes wrong, I don't need them to print.
Yeah.
I have that 24/7 liquid asset backing the debt. And that's, to me, this is the biggest shift that's taking place right now. It's the evolution of Bitcoin from digital gold to pristine collateral. And this is what BlackRock, Larry Fink, is coming out and talking about tokenization of real world assets. Other big market makers, they all want to provide liquidity. Like Bitcoin's, a lot of people asking right now, why isn't Bitcoin's price going up? And because over 50% of the Bitcoin being bought is being resold on the futures market to go short.
Yeah.
But are they going short Bitcoin? No, because they're also buying it. So they're buying it and they're selling it. Why? What happens is these market makers, they become delta neutral, which means the value of your position, let's say they're making a market with $1 billion. That means if the price of Bitcoin goes up, and it doesn't matter because the value of their short went down.
Right.
So they're still worth $1 billion.
Yeah.
But what's left over are all the traders and speculators and hedgers who have to pay the premiums to access those tools. So they are literally yield farming Bitcoin volatility.
Paper Bitcoin. Yeah.
So this is not something that's going to happen in the future. It's happening right now. And as these powers that be get more and more into the market, this is what's going to accelerate us out of the commodity cycle and into the money cycle. And the money cycle is a credit-based cycle that is more akin to an Austrian business cycle than it is to the fake price-controlled stated rates of the central bank trying to tell us where we are in the cycle.
Right.
So it's
price
shattering,
discovery.
right? You can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of reality.
Yes.
The Bitcoin commodity credit market is going to make known the consequences of this reality, of this test and this experiment that we've had with fiat currency since 71, really.
Wow, it's fascinating. And it largely mirrors what we used to see with gold too, right? That's what debt markets used to look like on a gold standard. So it makes sense.
And a lot of people say, you know, I get my kickback to that. They say, you can't have a credit market on Bitcoin, which is just, it's simply not true. You can actually have a healthy credit market on Bitcoin. I would go as far as saying you can't have a circulating credit market because that creates the results we have today.
Sure.
There's
like
nothing
credit.
that keeps you, there's nothing that limits you. There's no source of forcing interest rates up.
Right.
And even the natural capital allocators who understand that component can't force the interest rate up because there's stated anchor rates. And when the rates start to go too far, like the 10-year going above 4.5, that 10-year was not going to go above 5% ever. And I was one person who was calling for it. I was one person who said, if we get yield curve normalization, the Federal Reserve will lose control of the long end of the yield curve and yields will go to 8, 9%. Could you imagine the prime rate at 9% and mortgages going off at 11 and 12%? The market's already frozen with a 7.5% prime rate. And then what happens is they can't let that happen because their mandate is stability.
Yeah.
So now they have to perform yield curve control.
Yield curve control.
And that
financial
means
repression.
Burr it up, baby.
Yeah.
Burr it up. So it feeds itself. Like you said, it's that negative feedback loop that keeps feeding itself. And what's going to break that loop? What's going to wake people up? I don't think the smaller person's going to figure it out because most of them are not using credit. If they're using credit, it's on a credit card at 30%.
Yeah.
You know, they're not borrowing against their stocks. They're not borrowing against their real estate. They don't really understand what collateral is and how you can be empowered by it.
Yeah.
But the big boys are now starting to figure out, look, I don't want to lend to the government. Or if I'm going to lend to the government, I also want to lend to these Bitcoiner guys. Because if these Bitcoiner guys screw me over, I have less risk.
Yeah, you have, as you said, that's a very interesting framing. It's risk-free, right? Because it's fully collateralized lending. And if the LTV or whatever it is drops to the ratio, you just seize the collateral and you're done, right? You collected the interest payments and you sold the collateral to cover the loan, and that's that.
It keeps you in check.
Right.
The value of the underlying collateral, the base layer money, keeps the expansion of credit in check.
In check. It is.
And in circulating credit, there's nothing that keeps you in check.
Right.
And that's the difference.
And the government used to be considered the risk-free borrower because they can always print money to pay you back. But as we touched on earlier, if they're paying you depreciated dollars, then you might be taking a haircut anyways.
Yeah. You're going to get your money, but you don't know what the hell you're going to be able to buy.
You're going to get your nominal dollars back, but you don't know what the purchasing power will be. Yeah. So you are exposed. There is risk, whereas there's not risk with fully collateralized lending. That makes a ton of sense.
And if you transfer that to gold too, because this is a big thing. I see Judy Shelton and a couple other economists, older traditional economists, saying we can just revalue gold. Well, if the price of gold, you know, $20 an ounce of gold, $20 for that suit. $3,000 for an ounce of gold, $3,000. If you just say gold's worth $100,000, then doesn't the price of a nice suit go to $100,000? How does it magically not go to $100,000? You cannot revaluing gold is devaluing dollars.
Yeah,
it's the same thing.
Right.
So we can't just magically fix this. We do need to adopt an engineered money. And what's interesting is you would think that those consequences that the economists talk about can't be avoided. But I think with Bitcoin, it mitigates that consequence because something magic happens. You can borrow this currency against your money. And think of Bitcoin as engineered money that is a value accruing asset. So you have a deflationary value accruing collateral, and you're borrowing an inflationary value losing spending tool, currency against it. And something magic happens. Over time, you actually become empowered. So I think the way we escape this is to do not just a hard, that's it, no more fiat currency. No, I think we have to adopt Bitcoin as a base layer money and start to fuse circulating credit with commodity credit. And then as the value of the Bitcoin increases, you can look at, some people say we have a debt problem. What if we just have a collateral problem? And now we have the perfect form of collateral. So integrate it and fuse it into the balance sheet to eliminate the debt problem.
And doesn't that become the speculative attack on the US dollar? Basically when you're saving in Bitcoin and then you're borrowing weak currency and then spending the borrowed proceeds to acquire more. This is the strategy playbook. This is...
I don't like the term attack.
Okay.
I think I would say it's called defense.
Okay.
Because we are not the ones. You're right. It is referred to as a speculative attack in the wider marketplace.
It is more defensive than it is offensive.
Yeah, we're not abusing the currency.
Right.
We're playing defense.
Yeah.
We're looking at the rules of the game that you wrote, and we're positioning ourselves to be empowered by those rules.
To be protected from the inflation, but in so doing, there is an offensive element too, because you're borrowing and selling the weaker currency, thereby contributing to the demise of said currency.
You have to be confident in that.
Yes.
And that's where the attack portion comes. If you're not aggressive and confident in your understanding of the engineered money, then...
Again, these are just metaphors that were, attack, defense. We're using like war metaphors to describe these cycles, right? It's like you're either being accretive or dissipative or whatever the opposite of accretive is. Get on the right side of the trade, right? Learn how economics works and get on the right side of the trade. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money. And be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.